All right, so my talk will not be quite as amusing. My name is Charles Hudson. I am a front-end developer here at Yellow Pages. I work on yellowpages.com. So I work a lot with Vue code. And this talk is basically my way to just talk about some of the tips I would have for people who are working on code to help organize things, because a lot of times I go and code's not organized well, it's hard to find things, it looks like it could be refactored in a way. So I just wanted to put a simple presentation together on some of my ideas on how to have better, cleaner Vue code. All right. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about template and partial organization. I prefer to keep partials grouped with their parent templates and layouts.
Could you speak up just a little bit?
This is my
Maybe
outside.
A little louder.
I will attempt to speak louder, yes. All right. Okay, so now I have to get back to where I was thinking. All right, so I prefer to keep partials grouped with their parent templates and layouts. And so I allow other controllers' partials, other views, to access those partials when necessary. I prefer not to have common catch-all directories. Those tend to be just sinks for files. People drop them. It's like, oh, it's used in this controller. This view over here is using it. This view over here is using it. It's common. Let's throw it in a folder. Those files tend to get forgotten. It's where, common folders are where code goes to die. That's how I think of it. Okay, so if you see here, let me take a good look at what I've written here. All right, so this is kind of just a simple rundown of how I would organize things. You see, we've got a couple different things here. We got home. It doesn't have any partials. It will be accessing partials in other directories like photos. Application itself, instead of having, sorry, I don't know what this is.
It's at this point.
Oh, wow, it does stuff. Okay, all right. Okay, so in my layouts folder, I have an application subdirectory for things that go into or belong to the application layout. Keeping them out of a common directory because, who cares what's in the common directory? Okay, so move on from there. So if we're breaking down a template into partials, we would do so to share markup with other controllers' views. This is very basic here. We are on home index and we are rendering a partial from photos. Another one from photos, just getting a photo here and thumbnails. We can encapsulate markup related to an object. So you'll see here we're using this object here. We're not using locals. This way is a little bit cleaner than specifying locals. It also has better performance out here, but this talk isn't really as much about performance as it is maintenance or writing maintainable views. Okay, so this would be inside the photo. So we have some HTML5 stuff here, but this is where we're actually just rendering that photo in here. It's a hash. All right, and we also use it to iterate over collections. This is all pretty basic stuff, but I wanted to get it out there. So here's it's just one, and then the render collection is rendering this partial over and over again. We know how that works. Thanks, Al.
Yeah, no problem.
All right.
Here to distract you.
Yes. All right, and I would say to slice adequately large and complex templates into more manageable pieces. I have to specify adequately large and complex. It's not a good idea to just look and see what blocks of Vue code you can move into a partial. If it's not going to be shared, if it's not drying up your code, don't break it out into a partial unless your Vue has become so unwieldy that it's difficult to manage without slicing it up a little bit. one small example of this is when you're in a layout and you have your your header and your footer. Those can get large. Those can get complex. It's easier to manage it. It's easier to manage the code when multiple people are working on it because it's a large chunk of code. But that's just one example of where it would be conceivably okay to do so. All right, so now we're going to move on to organizing helpers. All right, so common helper methods should be grouped by logical unit. Okay. And I would say to consider removing the application helper to guide that. Application helper is yet another one of those code sinks. This needs to go, I don't know where this needs to go, so I'm going to throw an application helper because everything needs it, and the code goes there and it dies. All right, so here's an illustration of what I'm talking about. You can see the views here. These are the different view groups. But we have a couple different helpers in here. We have an analytics helper to for any helpers related to analytics, tracking, stuff like that. We have a let's see. I gave a layout its own helper because it might need something for itself, and that's I believe that's a good place to maintain that. We've got social helper. You've got social sharing links. You might need helpers for those, and you put them in some place where they live. Some place where someone can say this is where social share is. And also, I've scratched out application helper because you don't need that. Okay, and I would also say to avoid creating controller helper methods. To me, if you're writing controller helper methods, that means that you really need to look into refactoring your code. There should be no reason for your view to call a controller method to access a data store. Also, if you're trying to share code between the controller and the view in that way, you might be making the same call twice. Caching or not, you shouldn't be doing something like that. So I would say just do all the work that your view needs in the controller action. You can have other methods to dry those up as well, but leave those methods out of the view. Just leave them out. All right, so now we're breaking down helpers. All right, so one good way to, one good thing to do with helpers is to simplify conditional statements. I think that if you have a conditional statement, like if you say if, this, and that, and the other thing, that's too much Ruby code for review. You should at least have, you should have at most one method that returns true or false, one helper method. You can call that and wrap that around your code in the view. All right. We can also encapsulate minor portions of often used markup in here. So this is let's see here. So here we've got two. We've got this is the photos. I think it's the index file, and this is the thumbnail that it's going to generate from a collection. I think that this is probably, there are a couple problems with this, but this is a bit small for a partial. I really don't like seeing partials that have one or two elements in it. To me, that seems like something that can be factored out into something a little bit more manageable, a little bit more reusable. So this is what I would do. So here we just we call a helper to render a thumbnail list in the index there. And here I've fixed this problem. I've made this image tag here more reusable by just generating that in a helper. And also I'm generating this list here. So this is it's a couple more lines of code, but it keeps you from having an extra file that you don't need. Keeps you from having a lot of really tiny partials. All right. I also have this idea of wrapping blocks of markup to reduce Ruby code and views. This example is a little. It's not a good. Yeah. Can you read that?
It's pretty hard.
Sorry. All right, but it's not a very good example anyway. Because I was running out of time and ideas. So basically, I'm getting a user object. I'm cutting it out into different. This is what you shouldn't do. Cut it into different variables and then putting those variables in here. In a view, that's way too much Ruby. There's still problems with this code, but this helps alleviate the problem. So what I'm doing is I'm passing, if you look down here, I'm passing this block, what it was here, I'm passing this to a helper method as a block, and then I'm setting those variables here and passing it back through the block. So this, really cuts down the amount of Ruby code that's in. I mean, there's more that can be done to this, but this really helps cut down this block of Ruby code here. Could be done a better way, but it's, for an example, I think that people should at least consider passing view code to helpers as a block to keep markup, especially complex markup, in a view, in a partial, and to keep Ruby code in the helpers.
Why did you? Yeah. Good. Good.
What?
The concat with the block. Why was that?
That is it's a Rails 3 thing. It's I can't get it out right now, but
Yeah,
there
was a capture method there too.
Yeah.
Capture.
Capture, that was the one.
Yeah, there's concat capture. That's what I was asking about too.
Yeah.
Can you go back to the previous slide? You see there in the bottom of the user helper, the user content method.
Yeah.
You can So what is capture? Capture there is.
It's capturing this block.
What's that?
Basically, it's capturing that block. It's capturing this block right here, and then concat is making sure that that is actually being rendered out as HTML.
Okay.
So that's what it's.
What does it return? What sort of thing does it return?
This?
Yeah.
What, capture?
Yeah.
It's a string.
It returns the string that
Yeah.
would happen when you evaluate that
Yeah.
block.
Yeah.
So if you ever have, like in your view, if you ever have a block and you want to store that in a variable rather than spit it out, capture do normal HTML block.
Yeah. Thank you.
Camel block.
All right. So, okay. So move on from here. All right. Now I would also say avoid writing markup and helper methods. Personally, I prefer to keep like code with like. I think that's a no-brainer for maintainability of code. It's also, it saves you from trouble in your helper. You're trying to track down, maybe you use the wrong, you use single quotes instead of double quotes, or, you didn't close a tag correctly because you don't have a handle in a HTML, or a handle in a helper. But there are other reasons for that, but I think this is a good rule of thumb. Just keep like code with like. All right, so this is, this is a previous example here, and it's just, you have content tag that you can use. There are other tag helpers that you can use to generate this. In my opinion, it also makes these helpers a little bit more easy to test. So, or at least a little bit more testable. So,
You're saying don't write actual HTML as concatenated strings in these helper methods. So
right, or blocks, or however you want to write that. I think keeping the actual markup text out of the helpers is beneficial.
No, content tag can take a symbol as its retargeting, right?
It can.
Do you have a strong preference on that, or?
It doesn't matter to me. Usually I prefer symbols, but I was kind of just hacking away at this.
I wonder
so,
about that because
yeah.
I mean, it works either way.
Well, you'd cut down on memory also, I'm sure. But yeah, you can use symbols in there. But that wasn't really, the point of this wasn't to have beautiful code. It was to have well-organized code. And also, yeah, so that's the point of this talk. So I know there's some weird things in here. All right, so any other questions?
yeah, can I add something to your list, which is don't put business logic in the helpers? I've
Oh,
seen that a lot.
yeah, definitely.
You want to have
That's
conditionals in them, but only if they have to do with the presentation.
Yeah,
Like,
definitely.
Not anything that could be put in a model instead.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. That's a really good point. What was yours?
Be familiar with the presenter pattern.
The presenter pattern. I am not.
It is a solution to this problem that I prefer over writing heavy helpers. There was a nice presentation on it at RailsConf this summer. The idea, basically, you end up with another layer like model view and controller that's presenter. You only use it in cases where you're having the same kind of pain you're trying to solve here, where there's a lot of logic in your views, or you're transforming data in your views, or that sort of thing. And what you do is, at the end of your controller, when you've loaded the instance variables that you would pass to the view, you instantiate a presenter for the same. So if you're, user's controller and user's view, it would be a user's presenter, and then you'd pass it those instance variables. The presenter is just a straight Ruby class that does whatever transformations are necessary, does whatever logic is necessary, and exposes to the view just the data that needs to be shown and some simple Boolean methods. So your view things can be, equals this if a Boolean method, a single method on the presenter.
It sounds like moving, if you had like a decorator pattern, like moving that to the controller side instead of the model.
It's a little like that, and there are a couple of nice gems to help out with that. So it's just something to look into. It's another approach to solving the same category of
Sounds cool.
problems.
I just want to say thank you for talking about this.
Yeah.
Because for too long, the view and style sheet layers treated like shit.
Yep.
Rails applications.
Yep.
Oh, come on, front-end development is just so easy. There's no hard problem at all. And we spend our time doing it, so it's such a life.
Who needs them, right?
Yeah.
Causes a garbage pile in an application.
Oh yeah.
And I'm happy to see more people talking about it. I personally gave a talk a couple months back on a project that I started called Better Frontend. And it's best practices that I'm trying to start.
Cool.
So I love your input. You
Okay.
work you stuff right. Put a lot of stuff on the style sheet layer. So I'm looking for more people to talk to.
Okay, cool. Is there a website for it or?
Yeah, betterfrontend.com.
Betterfrontend.com. That's very memorable. Okay.
Can you give an example of the controller helpers we should be avoiding? So I'm wondering if that is the, if it's, the thing that I usually have trouble figuring out where to put is things that are depending on who's logged in kind of stuff. Because it's business logic, but you can't slip all the way to the model because you don't have a section and that. So is that the sort of thing you're talking about when you say don't do controller helpers?
Well, if those variables are set like this is the logged in user and this is the user who owns this, I think at that point it's safe to have the logic that just looks at those variables in the helper. Actually getting them and populating them should be done in the controller. So I don't think that should be mixed really, to my, in my mind. I don't really have an example of controller helpers because it's hard for me to think of a good reason for them. Because there's always a different way that I can just split it out.
Yeah, it sounds like you've seen this in the wild and refactored it. So
Yeah.
what's the code smell that we should be looking for?
The code smell is that it just looks wrong to me. Well, it's really that Well, I mean, there's other reasons why people would use a controller helper. Usually, I would think of is it's a method that someone has used in their controller, and they're like, hey, I could use this in this view. So they would make that a helper. And I usually think of that, and that to me is really wrong. If it's something like you're trying to figure out where the actual logic belongs, I think that binary logic belongs in the helper, but where those actual variables are set belongs in the controller. So you would have that helper in the helper, but the controller would be setting those variables. That's how I think of it.
There is another small trick that you can use to clean up your partials. Some time ago, Joseph Valem described like some new features in Rails 3.2, and one of those was like two partial path method, which right now is a part of active model, and you can use it. Basically, it makes your any model of a class, it can dynamically like generate the partial based on the method that you put in your model. It could be a little bit of arguing that it breaks your MVC, but still it's very useful, especially if you try not to use only MVC, but let's say a DCI pattern.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, then your object really handles, okay, what partial am I going to be rendered in? Then your object controls the partial, but not just the client.
Yeah, I don't. from that description, I'm not sure how I like how that sounds, but
Mhm.
I'm willing to give it a look.
Yeah, you,
So-
you should take a look. On Platform Attack, it was probably a couple of months ago. It's a nice article.
So Platform Attack, that's the name of the project?
I think it's called My 5 Favorite Hidden Features in Rails.
Right. All right, so, oh, yes.
Sorry, not clear. Like, what's the arguments about when you say do not use common folder for objects?
That's more from experience, because I've experienced on a lot of projects we have all kinds of partial files that are dead, and the only way to find out if they're actually being used is to go through each one of them in a common folder and to like just act or something, or just search for any instance or anything calling that. And I really hate that. I don't like dead code in my app, and I find that dead code always lives in these common things like the common folder. Also, it's just bad organization because you have to organize it all over again. Like if I'm going to have my layout partials in common because it's common to every page, I have to say common layout header, whereas I could just say like layout header, and you have access to any other directories partials. So just keep it where it belongs. Like if you're rendering a user object view of something, you have a partial for it, then keep it in user.
So since you use it to keep these partials in layouts folder.
That was an idea that I've had to keep, because they belong with layouts, because they're only used by the layout. They're not used by anything else.
I agree. Yeah, and there's one thing that I think a lot of people probably know this, but if you're making a Rails app, what happens is you'll end up with these directories, these helpers, or the view directories, and typically they're generated, and so they correspond like one-to-one with controllers. But you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying is to pick another name, pick a logical grouping, and it doesn't have to correspond to a controller necessarily.
And I'm saying that starting out it's good. You are going to have some code that is associated to that controller, so you might as well start with that. But you don't have to stick with that.
I think till Rails 3.2, I would agree that layouts is a good place to put your partials. Before that, people even put them into shared directory.
Yeah.
But since I think Rails 3.2, Rails introduced a way how like the view inheritance, and right now anything that you put into the applications view directory, that gets inherited. And I find that it's a much cleaner way to put your partials into application directory in your views, and they get inherited by everything else.
Okay, I have not.
Instead of just layouts, because layouts, I mean, it's arguable because layouts means like, I don't know, the whole layout of the page,
Yeah.
not just a partial.
Yeah.
So also worth trying.
Yeah, but I mean, if you do, but the idea with that is like if you do have a partial that is only used in layout, just keep it in the layout folder.
Right.
So, but that sounds, I haven't heard of that one. I haven't looked at 3.2 yet, so I'll have to look at that. All right, so.
I think it's great that there's so many questions, but we do need to move on.
Okay.
So please find Charles afterwards if you have other suggestions or questions or comments.